Hey, everybody, we're back. It's good to see you. Long time no see. But guess what? Turnbark time would not be down forever. Between the holidays and basketball season for me, we're back, baby. Bark, it's good to see you, man.
Yeah, I would say great to be back. Not that we've gone anywhere, but to be back in touch.
Yeah.
Um, we took a little siesta, a little extra summer holiday, or winter holiday, summer holiday for our Australian followers that don't exist. Um, do they? But it's let's see. One of our former students reached out and said, "Hey, there's stuff going down in the Ukraine or in Ukraine. Sorry, want to use the pro Ukrainian language
Yep.
and not the pro Soviet language, or
Yep.
sorry, Russian language. Um, so stuff's going down in the Ukraine, and you guys you asked for a video. So did Mr. Ramsey.
We deliver. It's our job.
We're here. We're here.
They pay
And
us.
so, we're going about as fast as Amazon Prime does in Cowlitz County. So it takes about it says 2 days, but it's 2 weeks. So it's been a while. So it's season 3, episode 6. Sorry, green screen back there.
So, and for those of you who don't know and you're joining us for the first time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we've been here a long time. So we got a call, Mr. Ramsey, Scott Ramsey, my fearless leader and your former fearless leader, asked for why aren't we talking about this. We had the conversation before that I'd spent about, I probably spent about 2 solid class periods with my 7th graders discussing this because they were really interested and have a bunch of questions and stuff like that. And like you've probably seen on the news and everything like that, we haven't seen a traditional land invasion in Europe like this since the Second World War. So it's getting kind of interesting.
Yeah, and when people on the news are saying the last time we saw this was when Germany went to Poland, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that started a really big thing called World War II. If you're not switched on historically, that's why we're here and we have jobs.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so kids are kind of like, they're kind of asking like, are we buying the hype? Like, is it World War III? Should we be worried? I graduated in 2003. I'm that old that I can't say 20 something. But I remember I graduated 2003. We watched in my senior civics class the liberation of Iraq. My brother, who was 2 years older than I was going into Iraq on the TV, and I was watching it going, oh no. So a lot of our seniors are really apprehensive at Ari Long High School, go Lumberjacks. And so my sophomores that I teach, we're kind of like, well, wait a minute. Like, the big question that a lot of people are asking is like, why?
And one of the big things is like when we talk about this is like my students asked the same exact question. They were like, why Ukraine? Like, why not, anywhere else? And again, 7th grade mentality, they came in, they're like, Turner, did you hear World War III started? And I was like, okay, first off, no. I was like, for it to be a world war, it has to involve countries around the world. Shout out to all those flat earthers out there around the world. Okay. But I said like multiple continents, it has to involve multiple countries, right? We're just, at this point, we're talking about, Ukraine and the Russian Federation, I guess is their official name. But anyway, so their history actually goes back a long, long ways. In World War II, as I so lovingly love to teach, or World War One, sorry, not two. World War One as a bar fight is one of my favorite ways to teach it. And it's Russia gets knocked out the window and wakes up with a new personality. And that is because they had the Soviet Revolution, or the Russian Revolution, in which the communist government was formed and the Tsar and the monarchy was overthrown. And actually, what's interesting is the area known as Ukraine applied to become a part of the Soviet Union in 1919 and was accepted, I think, what do we say, 22?
Yeah, I think it's part of the when they officially become the Soviet Union, or yeah, the USSR, the what was it, Soviet Socialist
Socialist
Republics.
republics. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Um, yeah, and like the history of Ukraine. So like one of the claims that Putin made prior to the special military operation was that he did not. He says that Ukraine has never had its own. Essentially, it's never been a real country. It's just been something that like the West has made up to thwart Russia. It's always been part of the Russian Empire. When in reality, a lot of people think that like Russia comes from the Rus people who come from the Kievan Rus, who are from Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine. So in a chicken and egg argument or a Ukraine and Russia argument, um, Ukraine is the chicken and Russia is the egg. One of those fancy eggs made of, sugar. But Fabergé egg, that's the word I was looking for.
There you go.
SAT word. But
Yep.
It's one of those things where like, no, there is a long-standing tradition. The American Medieval Academy, yes, a group of medieval historians from the United States made a statement the other day, put out a post that was like, here's the year 900, this is when Ukraine was established. Spoiler alert, it's before Russia. So Putin, you can't say that Ukraine has never existed and doesn't have a national identity. It does. Is it tied to Russian identity? At times, have they interacted? Yes. Nobody's going to deny that, but you can't deny the existence of Ukraine.
Yeah. And one of the biggest things that they actually said, and I saw this on the news when the original invasion took place on Thursday, was there were a lot of Ukrainians that were like, I don't understand why Russia's doing this. Russia is like our brother, right? A lot of Ukrainians, like their first language is either Russian or even they know a second language, and that second language is Russian. And so it was really confusing to some Ukrainians of why this is even happening. Good.
And so I guess the thing to understand is that this is really the modern problems that are happening are caused by relationships that come after post World War II Europe. And so after World War II, Germany's been, right, the Nazi regime in Germany's gone. It's actually split, right? They get divorced. There's West Germany, which is kind of it's kind of controlled by the other democratic European countries, Western European countries, Britain, France, America,
Yep.
who were like an adopted Western European country.
Mm-hmm.
Just there's a bigger moat. Yep. But and then you have Eastern Germany, which is under Soviet control. And so the Soviet Union at that time included, right, Ukraine, as well as like the Baltic states of like Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. Can't sleep on Latvia.
Nope.
As well as like Bulgaria and Romania. And so there was a lot of animosity after World War II between essentially capitalist countries, capitalist democratic countries versus communist countries, or the communist Soviet Union, and then China, and then a little bit like kind of Korea, Vietnam. But in 1991, when the Soviet Union fell apart, right, it dissolved. In the lead up to that, there was the creation of NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and then the Soviet Union made the Warsaw Pact as kind of like these two multinational defense pacts to prevent anybody from essentially like going to war with anybody else. And this is where you got the idea of like mutually assured destruction with nuclear weapons. And so like that's why we got into wars like Korea and Vietnam, where we weren't directly fighting against other major powers, but like they were supporting the pro-communist part of the country. We were fighting against that, or we were supporting a pro-democratic party to fight against that. Or like Afghanistan, where the Soviets were trying to push into Afghanistan, and the United States gave support to the Mujahideen because we didn't want to fight directly against, because that's why it was Cold War, right? Because there's no hot exchange between the United States and the USSR.
Yeah.
I guess fast forward to 1991, the Soviet Union gets divorced. Everybody becomes independent. So like Ukraine becomes independent, Moldova becomes independent, all of the stands over there above Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Uzbeks, the Kazakhs, all those guys, they get their own countries. And then gradually what happens is that NATO has expanded in the Baltic states. So again, I'm not going to list them again, but go back. You can rewind 2 minutes ago. The Baltic states joined NATO. So does Bulgaria and Romania. And so from Putin's standpoint, according to the speech that's been televised, is that he's viewed the expansion of NATO as kind of like a subtle act of aggression against Russia, because it's the Warsaw Pact doesn't really exist anymore, because like Poland, which is where Warsaw is
a part of NATO.
Is part of NATO. So the Warsaw Pact unpacked.
Yeah.
They kind of like flip sides. And so Russia's seen that as, they want a buffer. And so like they have Belarus, which is kind of sits right in front of Russia and pretty much does what Russia asks it to do. Mm-hmm. So it's a yes man to Russia.
Yeah.
And Ukraine is kind of right below that and serves as kind of a secondary buffer zone. And so what Russia's worried about losing control of Ukraine and Ukraine establishing stronger trade relationships with Europe. And they also want Ukraine. They took part of Ukraine in 2014. They took Crimea, which is a peninsula down at the bottom, which gives them better access to the Black Sea. And if you don't know anything about the history of Russia, Russia's problem is it has a bunch of coastline, but none of it stays warm year round.
Yep.
And that's problematic when you're trying to put ships in the water.
Right.
And so in 2014, and a lot of Ukrainians would say that this isn't new. Like we've been fighting Russian aggression since 2014, when that would have been Obama was in office, and they annexed Crimea. Mm-hmm. Right? Russia came in and just straight up took part of Ukraine, and then started supporting separatists in eastern Ukraine in the Donbass region, which you probably heard on the news, which includes Donetsk and Luhansk, which right before the invasion, Putin recognized as independent countries, which Russia's the only country in the world that's recognizing those two independent states, and is claiming to, from the Russian perspective, and I don't mean like average Russian, Putin's perspective, he's arguing that they came in as peacekeepers to protect the pro-Russian people in Crimea and in Luhansk and Donetsk in the Donbass region, which are essentially right next to Russia. But in the special mission, they didn't just move into eastern Ukraine. They came down from Belarus, like straight down the highway. They came up from Crimea. Like there was a map and it showed there's bomb strikes all over Ukraine. It wasn't localized to just the Donbass, which if your justification was saying we're just here to take and protect these people, you'd think that you would just be active in that one region, as opposed to what looks like a national theater.
Yeah, a full-scale invasion.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was interesting is a lot of people thought that was what the move was going to be, right? When he amassed his troops on the border of Ukraine, the thought of most people was that he's going to work his way in and take those two new states and bring them under Russia's control and everything like that. But then when it became a full-scale invasion, it was like, nope, he's going to just try for, and when I say he, it's Vladimir Putin, he's going to try for all of Ukraine. And a lot of this is when I looked at it, it was more of he's trying to figure out what he can get away with, right? He was successful in getting away with taking Crimea. He was successful in taking two Georgia states. And I don't mean the state of Georgia that's above Florida and below South Carolina. I mean the country of Georgia.
Over by Armenia and Azerbaijan and the Caucasus Mountain region.
Yep. Perfect. Which is where we get Caucasians.
True.
And so it was surprising that he did his full move and everything like that. Well, obviously the Ukrainian people have have rebounded from the initial shock of the attack, which was kind of like my fear personally when I looked at it and I said, okay, a full scale invasion, everything like that. But what was interesting was that first day, that Thursday, was a lot of the people had said that they had roughly 190,000 troops involved with this invasion. And for those of you who don't know or haven't heard yet, Ukraine is about the size of Texas. And so to hold the size of Texas militarily, like to actually hold on to the land, you need, I think of the estimate that I got on CNN and Fox, and I think I just got it from those two, was roughly you need like 800,000 to a million troops. And he's attacking with 190,000. So it was like, is his initial intent to actually hold Ukraine as his own, or is there more of a shock and awe factor here that's going on? And when we've seen now a couple of places, like obviously they were successful. One scary thing was like they were successful in taking Chernobyl. Those who don't know, Chernobyl is the site of a major nuclear reactor meltdown that was extremely hazardous, not only the people of Ukraine, but all the surrounding countries. And there still is an exclusion zone where you can't go in because there's nuclear dust sitting on the ground. If that goes up in the air and we breathe it in as humans, it's bad. Shocker. And so there are some areas of this that have happened where the Russians have come in and they're still trying to take Kiev. And I'm trying to remember, what's the other major city? I'm trying to take one other one.
Is it Kharkiv?
Yep, thank you. Kharkiv.
Kharkiv. Something. It's in the east more.
Yep. So they're trying to take these two major cities, but what they're finding is that there's Ukrainian resistance. I don't think they realized what Ukraine was willing to do, right? And I think we've all kind of seen it. You've seen the Ukrainian, like there's the first one picture that popped up was like a 80-year-old man showed up with like 2 shirts, a pair of pants, and a couple of sandwiches for lunch in his like briefcase, and he was ready to fight, right? And he was going to fight for his grandkids. And then like I saw the other day, I saw Miss Ukraine with an AK-47 across her chest, like ready to go. There was another story. It was like a couple, they had gotten married on the day of the invasion, and they're spending their honeymoon right now with AK-47s fighting the Russians. So this is really, I historical comparisons, and maybe I'm jumping a little too far ahead, but historical comparisons I saw this matches a lot of like the Vietnam War and then the American, more recognizable the American Revolution in terms of strategy and counterinsurgencies and things like that.
So I guess kind of the next step where a lot of people have been asking, like the big thing, so like President Biden had the State of the Union tonight and was very clear that we want to support the people of Ukraine, but we're not fighting Russia. American soldiers aren't fighting Russia in Ukraine. Like, he was very clear about that. And I guess there's a lot of animosity and kind of misunderstanding about that part of the conflict. From an international law standpoint, we're part of NATO. And NATO, in Article 5 of the NATO Charter, says that an attack on one NATO nation means that all of the NATO nations get to fight back. The problem is Ukraine's not a member of NATO. I use the analogy of like, it's like the Avengers saying that the Avengers will defend the other Avengers and Ukraine's Wolverine. Well, we like Wolverine. We think he's a cool dude, but our bylaws say that we can't protect him because he's not part of the Avengers, right? And that's what NATO is. And so it's leading to a lot of frustration, I think, for Americans, because we feel it's kind of like feel like Putin's being the bully, and Ukraine, we want to help Ukraine. They're doing a lot. They're right, because I think there's kind of a stigma that happens a lot when these conflicts happen. We're like, oh, well, the native people don't want to fight back, which often is misinformed. But anyways, like the fact that the Ukrainian resistance has been so stout, right? They put in a policy that if you're between 18 and 60 and a man, you can't leave the country. You're supposed to get a gun and go fight. They've released, which this will probably be a problem after the war is over, thousands of military grade like AK-47s to citizens, and essentially said, like, here's a gun, go fight an insurgency against the Soviets, against the Russians. Soviets are gone, but it feels like that era again. And so like a lot of nobody, in a way, it's kind of like the prelude to World War II, in that nobody wanted to get into a fight, because we knew that when two big nations, two major military powers, get into an argument, and if they go to war, it's going to be a big war. And so nobody in Europe really wants to, I guess, escalate to that level. And the big thing that they're asking for, President Zelensky has been asking for a no-fly zone to be instituted over Ukraine, which would prevent Russian aircraft from coming in and dropping, there's claims of them dropping vacuum bombs, which essentially blow up and then use the oxygen in the air around it to make the explosion, the blast radius, like even bigger. The U.S. has been very hesitant to say, like, we're very we're not willing to do that, and a lot of other NATO nations are saying, no, we're not putting our planes, like, because they see that it's just asking for, like, if Russia violates the no-fly zone, you're asking one of the NATO airplanes to shoot down a Russian aircraft, where Putin can turn around to his people and go, see, I told you that NATO was the aggressor. And so it's kind of this, like, political game of chicken. And I think there's this growing feeling out of just kind of like basic human instinct to, like, we got to punch the bully. And, like, so we're trying stuff with economic sanctions, with, like, Biden announced tonight that we're closing off American airspace. The EU's closed off their airspace. So is Canada. The danger is that Russia is a global supplier of oil and natural gas.
Yep.
And those pipelines run through Ukraine. And they've been trying to circumvent that by bringing them down by Crimea and running them to Turkey that way. And then with the Nord 1 and Nord 2 pipelines that run through the Baltic Sea towards Germany. But, like, the EU gets 1/3 of their natural gas from Russia. Germany, who's the 4th largest economy on the planet, gets half their gas and coal, half their natural gas and coal, and 1/3 of their oil from Russia. And so, and the flip side of it too, like, there's been some people have been critical of the Middle Eastern nations, like, why is Saudi Arabia, like, they abstained from a UN vote to condemn the action. And people are saying, well, why are they doing that? Why aren't they doing more? And it's like, Russia and Ukraine are 1/4 of the world's production of wheat. And the Middle East is a major consumer of that crop. So we're concerned with higher gas prices and food costing more. Some of those countries, their conversations are like, do we want to have food?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily that having to pay a higher price for food. It's, do you literally have the raw material to make your food?
Yep.
You know what I mean? So we have to keep that in mind, that this is way more complex, and there's a lot more, like, international. People are frustrated by the red tape.
Yep.
And that could come from Trump's presidency, where he kind of had this brash, like, if we want to do it, we're going to do it. And, like, the red tape be damned. And so now there's kind of this more cautious approach, and we're looking for multinational action.
Yeah.
Right. This is not America taking, going into Iraq by itself or with a small group of allies in 2003. We want this to be, if there's action, we're not going to act alone. We're going to have support from NATO. It's just a matter of, will the economic sanctions hurt I don't think it's meant to hurt the common people of Russia. They're targeting the oligarchs. And so if you don't know, like, Russia has essentially a small group of people with a lot of money who exert a lot of control and influence in Russia. And I kind of explained it to my kids. They're asking, like, what do you mean? And I go, where America got into the age of industrialization, and then we had policies to make things better for workers and kind of spread the wealth out. Not saying there's not a disproportionate amount at the top, but Russia didn't really get to that point where they had the communist revolution, where they didn't get those policies that kind of made a middle class. And you still have these people that are taking advantage of the working class and making them, like, I guess, a disgusting amount of money. And so, like, those are the people they're trying to target with, like, so they shut down SWIFT, which is an international banking system that, like, where countries, like, they're shutting down, like, a few banks at a time from Russia. And again, those decisions are being made multinationally, right? like multilateral. Like it's not just the United States saying, "Well, shut down SWIFT." We don't run SWIFT, right? We have to ask all of the other members. Like a lot of them are in the EU, and be like, "Is this okay?" Because it's going to hurt their economies way more than it hurts the U.S. economy. And there's been part of it, like we've kind of not touched oil exports for that reason, to try and stabilize those prices. But the price of oil is still over $100 a barrel, which means we're going to pay more for gas, even though the International Energy Commission or whatnot, 31 countries that hold like has strategic, I guess, like reserve, multinational reserve of oil, are going to release 60 million barrels, I think, and 30 million barrels of that is coming from the U.S. So half of that's coming out of the U.S. And I mean, people are like, well, that's only a few days of oil, but it's like, we don't know how long this conflict is going to be, how long the war is going to last.
Right.
And like, when Biden announced these, he said, well, it's going to take months for us to see. And like, my first reaction was, well, does Ukraine have months to survive?
Yep. But that's the interesting piece. That goes back to that thing where I was talking about. This is where I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, right, he can capture Kiev. Putin can capture Kiev, right? He can capture the major cities. But when you look at attacks in the West, there aren't very many, right? Like when you saw the original map of all the bombshells and everything like that, there's one bombshell really in the West. And so it's like this is going to last a long time. And a lot of people, like even former generals that were on major news networks, were talking about how this is going to be something that's going to be, Russia is setting themselves up for, the analogy they used was like our Afghanistan, right? Like you think you're going to go in, you think it's going to be quick, but then all of a sudden you're going to run into this insurgency where it's George Washington style, right? Like as long as they exist, they're going to cause you problems.
And I had that same thought today as kids were leaving. Somebody was asking me about it, and I was like, if you're fighting an invasion or you're kind of the rebels, right? As long as you don't get completely destroyed, the war's not over. You just can't get obliterated.
Yeah.
You just have to adapt and survive. And I know it hits all the people my age, is like, Red Dawn vibes.
Yep.
Where average people are picking up arms and defending their country. And like, if you want to know what patriotism is, like, this is patriotism. And like, the other thing to think about too is that nobody really knows what Putin hasn't been crystal clear about what his plan is. And it's,
or what
for months, what he wants. Like, what is he trying to get? Like some people said, well, it was just a show of force so that he looks strong. And then he can say, well, I pushed the West to the brink and then brought it back. Well, he went past the brink.
Yeah.
And so now the question is, does he want just Eastern Ukraine? And then there's a lot of people are saying like, well, yeah, he wants to maybe take the Donbass and then connect it to Crimea. And then, then why not just take control of the Dnieper River, the major river system that runs north and south through to Ukraine. And then he's also pushing towards Kyiv, which by pushing to Kyiv, that shows that he probably wants to get rid of President Zelensky and put a more pro-Russian leader in place,
yep.
Which isn't how democracy works.
No.
But, I guess...
Really quick, sorry to interrupt you. We've done that a time or two from our standpoint as Americans, where we've been taking somebody that has been controlling the country and we've removed them and put in pro-democracy, right? And it hasn't always worked out in our favor. So it's like, it's not something, Russia's not alone in doing this, right? We've done stuff like this as well, not in terms of a full-scale land invasion, but it is something that like major powers try and manipulate some of the powers around them to do these things.
Yeah, and I guess the worst case scenario is that people are worried that if they roll over Ukraine, the next country is Moldova, which has Transnistria. Mm-hmm. There's an element in the eastern part of Moldova that is pro-Russia, which these pro-Russian areas tend to also pop up near where there's like mineral deposits that are worth trade value.
Yep.
Weird. And Moldova's also not a member of NATO. So again, it would be like, it's kind of like a bully looking at kids at lunch and going, whose lunch money can I take? Who's not good enough friends with anybody else that I'll get punched back.
Yep.
And so that's why they're looking at these other, they're kind of, people are going, is Ukraine just the beginning?
Yep.
Is because Putin's rhetoric at the beginning of this was very much like a Soviet reunion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to bring back the pieces that used to be part of the USSR. We should do that again. He's like, the greatest tragedy.
Yep, was the
collapse of the Soviet Union. But again, right now, the EU, NATO, and the United States and other countries of the world are trying to fight using economic tools right now, sanctions. UEFA, this seems really like weird and like kind of an odd thing to do, but like FIFA and UEFA, which are the governing bodies of world soccer, have banned Russia from their club teams or their national teams playing, which it's World Cup qualifying season. The Russian women's team were supposed to play in a European, like the women's Euro this summer. And that seems like small stuff, but Russia waited until the Olympics were over to go to war.
Yep.
So trophies maybe matter to, they like to show prowess in that way. Like we're big, we're tough, we can win at sports, we can do these things. And so they're taking those things away from them. And individual countries are starting to target like Russian-based companies. I just saw something, the state of Oregon, it's like, here's a list of Russian-made like alcohol that we're no longer going to, like, we're going to boycott until this is over. And so you do that to create unrest for the working class. So like there was something, and again, I didn't verify this one, so this is kind of a skit. Like, I'm hesitant to mention this. They were saying that like they pulled Apple Pay and Google Pay from Russia, and then it showed this huge buildup of people at the like transit station in Russia because now they have to use cash, because that's a huge way to be just like, we're so tech dependent to pay our bills that if somebody were to remove all of those electronic ways to do that, it would be a disruption. Anonymous has been attacking Russian governmental sites and hacking, and they've declared, we're going to do this until this stops. So I'm just trying to look through anything else that's on here.
10 hours ago, Apple said it stopped selling all its products in Russia. So I didn't see anything about Apple Pay. Oh, sorry. Apple Pay and other services have been limited.
Okay.
So that's
it's
CNET and CNN.
Trying to make things inconvenient. And now like governments are starting to target individual oligarchs and freeze their assets. And one of the big moves, I guess, that happened, I think it was yesterday, was the Swiss came out and said they're in favor of putting sanctions and like freezing assets and switch the Swiss bank accounts, which historically Switzerland has remained neutral.
Yes, that's
and so like a lot of people are like, that you're in the wrong
when Switzerland
breaks neutrality to tell you to stop.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I know, like, I guess the hardest part of this for the West and for Americans is this idea that we feel like we should go in and stop it. Like, these people want to defend their country. They lack the military tools to do so. Like, there was an article that said they tried to call and said, hey, President Zelensky will give you a lift and get you out of Ukraine.
Yep.
And he replied, no, I need more Stinger missiles. Like, I need more Javelin missiles. Like, I need more ammo. Like, the problem isn't me being here. The problem is we need more ammunition.
I don't need a ride. I need more ammunition.
I need more ammunition, right? And I think that's the part where people are frustrated. Like, we want to support them. We're going to do that. There's a massive bill apparently that's going to go before Congress tomorrow that largely has bipartisan support. Like, this is something where like people are like, no, Russia's out of line. America will stand up to Russia. We don't care if you're Democrats or Republicans. Like, this is something that all Americans agree on. Like, countries can't just invade other countries and try and, usurp their sovereignty, take control of them. So it probably is going to be a long conflict, unfortunately, where, there's this 30 to 40 mile long convoy of Russian troops and material, like going towards the capital of Kyiv, which is the size of Detroit, where a lot of American military people are like, well, if you just took an American Predator drone, you could just boop, 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 and solve that problem really quick. But then, it's like we don't have any international legal justification. And that's why they're trying to take evidence before the International Court of Justice that Russia is bombing like civilians, and that makes it a war crime. And so then you can get other multinational bodies involved to come in and try and stop what Russia's doing, right? So it's just a matter of at what point is he going to cross the red line where people are going to be motivated enough to go in and like save Ukraine before it's too late.
Yep. It's one of those ones too where we look at it and it's not going to be, like you said, it's not going to end probably very quickly. The one thing we haven't talked about that's kind of hanging on the edge, but we've discussed it very briefly in terms of MAD, but Putin did up his nuclear alert status for his country, right? And again, man has the power to destroy mankind, I believe is the famous line. And then what Robert Oppenheimer said after watching the atomic bomb, who's the scientist who helped design it, said, "I'm death and destroyer of worlds," right? So there is that thought. There are some people that are really concerned that Russia is going to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. I think
NATO's been pretty clear that if he tries to do that, then all bets that's a big red line.
Well, and it's going to be if that happens. In China has been sitting on the sidelines of this. They have not commented. They tend to be pro-Russian when it comes to their stances, but I also think China does whatever benefits them the most, which is fair. It's a country they're looking for themselves. But I think even China would come out and condemn that if it were to happen, and because we know that how crazy it could get. We own enough nuclear weapons to wipe our species off the face of the planet. And so there's not a thought. I don't know if he's ramping that. And the other thing that's really interesting about this, Barker, I have a question for you. Okay, with this. So I'm not sure of the date, and I can look it up real quick. Let me see really quick. I apologize. So in 1994, in Budapest, Ukraine signed a treaty with the United States and Russia to give up all their nuclear weapons. Ukraine had the third most nuclear weapons in the world. Their agreement was that they got to be their own country. So since we signed a treaty with them and Russia is violating that treaty, does that give us any right to go in there?
I think at this point, we're going to wait for NATO or the UN or some other multinational organization.
I agree. That's the right thing to do. But it was one of those things that, like, when
you could argue, and if we had a more, I guess,
like, you agreed to keep them sovereign. That was why they gave up their nuclear weapons. Because I don't know if Putin's doing the same thing or devising the same strategy if Ukraine actually has nuclear weapons.
Yeah, the other thing that's happening too is like they had peace talks at the border between Belarus, and Belarus voted to give up their nuclear free designation that would essentially allow Russia to bring nuclear ordnance into Belarus and make them a nuclear country, like for war, not for electricity or anything, right? So that's been troubling as well. But there's been a delegation from Ukraine and a delegation from Russia that's been meeting at the border. They had one meeting for peace talks, but at the same time that they're meeting for peace talks, Russia's shelling the cities. And today, after that peace talk ended without a resolution, there's been an increased amount of shelling happening against Kyiv and these major cities, these major population centers where they're not even just bombing. They're not bombing military infrastructure or government infrastructure. They're bombing.
Sides.
And at that point, I think the more that happens, and like you could look at that and say like that's Putin trying to leverage the Ukrainians to the table more, because from what we hear, Russia is essentially asking Ukraine to surrender. That's what the peace talks are. From Russia's perspective, is it's okay, you're ready to give up. Where Ukraine's like, no, we want you to recognize that we're an independent country and get out. But that's not something that it seems Putin's not willing to entertain that idea. And so like I'm troubled by the idea that there's peace talks, but it doesn't seem that normally when there's peace talks, like you de-escalate what's going on, where
right, you hold
it's
off.
the exact opposite
Yep.
what seems to be going on. So again, I think for a lot of people, it's really kind of hard to gauge what's Putin's end game. And there have been protests in Russia. People have been arrested by the thousands because a lot of them are like, you know, like they support their country, they're nationalistic, but they're like, we're not really sure what he wants, like what he's doing. You know what I mean? Like it's that's what's kind of scary about this. It kind of feels like we're not quite sure what Putin wants. And like he met with he had a conversation with Emmanuel Macron, who's the leader of France, and you know Macron was quoted as saying like, well, he's different. And it's like, well, what do you mean, right? Like, so there's, I think that instability. I don't know if that means that it's starting to become uncomfortable for him domestically. You know, is there going to be a revolt? Like, will the people of Russia rise up against the government and be like, this is inappropriate? It's hard. It'd be hard for that to happen.
Yep.
Because the Russian government tends to be pretty repressive.
Mm-hmm.
What's probably more likely is that if you start squeezing the oligarchs and the people with a lot of money and a lot of influence, maybe they will lean on him to be like, hey, let's stop doing this. It's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it just kind of feels like this, you know, you're just looking at it like this is a senseless act. And it's not the first time. During the 30s, during like 1932 to 33, something called I don't speak Ukrainian, but Holodomor, which is essentially death by starvation. So while they were part of the Soviet Union essentially, like it's the breadbasket of Europe, right? There's all of these farmers kind of in the middle plain of Ukraine, and they were having them grow grain, and then they took all the grain and fed the larger cities in the Soviet Union, and then starved the farmers and like killed 3.5 million Ukrainians through starvation. So it's not the first time like Russia, you know, there's distrust between Ukraine, like even though they say they're brothers, it's like Russia's not always treated Ukraine, you know, well. And so Ukrainians would much rather, you know, keep sovereignty and make decisions for their own country rather than rely on whatever goodwill or charity that they get from Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Which is, history has shown us, is probably not very charitable.
No.
So, yep. So again, evolving situation. We're recording this Tuesday night. Who knows what we wake up to tomorrow morning, you know, on the 2nd of March and stuff like that. So big thing is like, just if you want to try and support the people of Ukraine, there's many charities and stuff like that out there that are helping. The other one is obviously anytime there's a war, you have an influx of refugees. So we're gonna have refugees probably from Ukraine that'll be coming to the United States and things like that. You know, and those are the people like you can look to help, and different situations like that. It's a terrible situation for everyone involved, I would say, except for Vladimir Putin. So that would be my strong, you know, piece. I think there are Russian people that are innocent. There have been reports of Russians laying down their weapons because, again, their army is made up of a ton of conscripts, and saying like, hey, they don't want to do this. And so, we're going to see. It's an evolving situation, but it's going to have the world's attention for a good, you know, hopefully not too long. Hope it's solved sooner than later. But my projection is kind of like you. I think it's going to be, if not weeks, months until we see a resolution. So. Yeah,
my big ask is that if you have Russian or Ukrainian or both populations in your community in the United States, don't commit any acts. Like, it's not their fault. Like, there's somebody who runs like a, you know, I used to live in Central, like right by Quincy, there's Soap Lake, which has a lot of Russians and Ukrainians in it. There's stores with signs that are in Cyrillic.
Yeah.
It's not their fault.
Nope.
right? Those are people that are here in America. They're not Vladimir Putin.
Yep.
The Russian people, for the large matter, like aren't in favor of this war. They just necessarily like they lack agency
Yep.
to stop it, right? So don't take your anger out on somebody who isn't the problem,
Right.
right? You know, and if you want to find ways to help, again, make sure you find yourself a legitimate charity or whatnot that you're willing to give your time to, or give your effort to, and just verify your sources as you're looking at stuff.
Always.
That's the really hard thing for me. Like people are like, well, look at this on Twitter, look at this on Instagram, and it's like I have a really hard time trusting that stuff. They took down the Russian Times news network in America, in the United States, and it's now been taken down in the EU and the UK as well to try and limit the, I guess, Russian perspective. And like, I'm not pro-Russian, but I was like, I would have been interesting to see what their perspective was. Because like I said, I'm bouncing between CNN, Fox, Reuters, BBC, and Al Jazeera.
Yep.
Right? That's kind of the 5 that I circulate around just to see the different aspects that they bring to the table, American perspectives, British perspective, and then a non-European perspective. So don't believe everything you see on the internet. Check your facts. It's probably not as cool as they make it sound, but that's the reality of the situation. And the hardest thing is that I just hope that we find a resolution and ways to help Ukraine so that Ukraine can push Russia out as quickly as possible.
And maintain their sovereignty and independence.
Yes.
So that this doesn't happen again.
And get Crimea back.
Yep, that would be ideal. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed us back. We're not sure when we'll be back again. Just keep looking out. We'll surprise you like a jack in the box. So until next time, Bark, anything?
Good luck to the Quincy Jacks tomorrow as they play their first round game at State in Yakima. And then good luck to the...
I get to say it. So, hey, good luck to the R.A. Long Lumberjacks. I think their first game is Thursday.
Yep.
And they do not know their opponent yet, correct? Because they have to wait.
They will play the winner of Tumwater and Grandview.
Okay. So, hey, good luck to both sets of Jacks. Go Jacks, and that's a good way to end it. Until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bart.
And we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And be well.